Good evening, everyone. It's 6 p.m., so I will get started. I am Laura Payne, the Oakland Town Chair. Thank you for coming this evening to our second public forum regarding the Enbridge spill on Line 6, just down the road on Highway 18. So tonight we're going to have a similar format as we did at our first meeting. I will have introductions for our Enbridge representatives, the DNR, and the county. And afterwards, Enbridge is going to have a presentation of their next steps, outlining their work plan and other reports that they've recently submitted to the DNR. After the presentation is over, we invite Oakland residents to come and come up to the microphone here. Everyone is allowed 3 minutes to ask a question, and the appropriate people will answer it. We want to ensure that everybody has a chance to speak that wants to speak, so please keep your comments limited. At the end, with time remaining, we will go back around, and if anyone has additional questions or comments, they're welcome to come up again. And if time is still allowing, we will have some non-residents ask questions if they would like to do so. So to get started, first I would like to have our Enbridge representatives introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Shane Yoakum. I'm the Environment Supervisor for Enbridge's liquid operations in the U.S.
John Schwartz, Technical Supervisor for the station here, but I have portage to the Illinois border.
I'm Brad Del Santo. I'm with GEI Consultants, and I am providing consultation, environmental consultation for Enbridge.
And here's our DNR representatives.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Isaac Ross. I'm South Central Region Supervisor for Remediation Redevelopment Program within the DNR. We're overseeing the cleanup and investigation work done by Enbridge. I've got 10 years experience in the environmental industry. I've been with the DNR for about 8.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Trevor Noble. I am the Deputy Program Director for the remediation team at the Wisconsin DNR. I am located in the Milwaukee office, although I do oversee statewide operations for the remediation team. My background is in contaminant geology. I've been doing this about probably 19 years.
I'm Caroline Rice. I'm a hydrogeologist with the Wisconsin DNR, out of the Fitchburg office, and I'm the project manager for this site.
Thank you. And we also have in the audience here representatives from the county that have been very instrumental in helping out the town with this project. So we'd like to introduce them as well.
I'll just say hi quickly. My name is Michael Lucky. I'm the Jefferson County Administrator. Our Land and Water Department, Cicero, our Health Department, Elizabeth McGeary, and our Emergency Management Director, Tracy Hamill, have all been very involved with Laura and the town, with the DNR, with Enbridge. So we're here just to monitor. I'm going to have to head out in about 15 minutes, but Patricia's going to be here and we'll also make sure we're staying on top of this. But we just want to thank the town and these officials as well for all they've been doing.
Thank you. Okay. With our introduction complete, we'll get on with the presentation.
Okay, and just before I start the presentation, I'd like to introduce Carl Biester to the group. So Carl's a Enbridge employee in our remediation department, and he'll be taking the lead on Cambridge long-term. So we're just now starting to work transition between Carl's work group and my work group. And so that'll transpire here over the next month or so. And then Carl will become the lead of this project. And I'll still be available to support as needed. All right, well, with that, we'll go ahead and kick it off. I guess we last met here in January after we had completed some immediate actions, interim and immediate actions at the site. And so now we thought we'd have another community meeting to talk about what we've done since we've been here in January, then also to talk about the work plans that we put together for the site going forward. Is there anyone in attendance tonight that wasn't at the meeting in January, just out of curiosity? Okay, so some of the information that we present here tonight is dependent probably on knowing some of the materials that we presented at the last meeting. So If you got any questions, you can ask them during the Q&A, or I'll stick around afterwards to explain things in more detail to you if you're interested. In January and in March, we completed some sampling of water wells and surface water sampling. And this is just a brief synopsis of that. Total of 34 water samples were collected. And the results from those show that there were no VOCs in the water. In addition to that, we also had biweekly DNR site visits during this time period. As I just mentioned, all the samples were analyzed for volatile organic compounds. No VOCs have been detected to date in any of the samples that we've collected. And all this information, as we collect it, is getting uploaded to the DNR's remediation website. And so it's all available for public viewing if you're interested. Here's a visual on where all the samples were collected, so you can see a number of the residents in and around the Cambridge station had their water well sampled. And then in addition, we collected a number of samples again from the temporary wells that we installed in December at the facility, as well as the existing monitoring wells that we had at the station, including the station's potable water well. Just a reminder that all the activities that we've completed have been done in accordance with the WDNR's NR 700 to 799. Those are all the rules and regulations for responding to releases, investigating sites, remedial actions, and then working toward site closure. So all activities proposed, planned, and completed at the site will be reviewed and approved by the DNR. Back in January, we put together an immediate and interim actions report, which was submitted to the agency the very end of January, or near end of January. And that contained a lot of information about discovery of the release, subsequent regulatory notifications, the repair that occurred, how the source area was excavated and evaluated. We also looked at all the work that we did for evaluating nearby receptors, which included the adjacent agricultural drainage ditch, on-site wells, and private wells. And it also included information about waste management activities. So now we come to February, and since that time we've been developing a number of work plans. And the first of which is the site investigation work plan. And this really kicks off the remedial process with the DNR. And so the work plan was submitted, this site investigation work plan was submitted back on February 17th. It actually just got approved on Friday, so this slide's slightly dated. And really the key purpose of the site investigation work plan is to complement the investigation work that we had done to date, which we began late last year. There's three key components to the site investigation work plan. There's a groundwater investigation, there's a soil investigation, and then we also want to look to make sure that there isn't additional preferential pathways at the facility that the oil is following. Preferential pathways would be things like underground pipe, conduits, other underground features which the oil makes it easier for the oil to follow underground as opposed to trying to push its way through the soil. And really all this work we see is building upon the immediate and interim actions that we've already completed. So for soil investigation, we're going to do a number of additional borings using the same technology that we had out there back in December. These will be borings that will help us identify if there's additional areas of oil that weren't found in our initial investigation. And it'll also be an opportunity to collect samples for analysis. And really what this is helping us do is really better define the lateral and vertical extent of impacts at the site. Now the preferential pathways. If you were able to look subsurface at the Cambridge station, there's a number of pipelines that run through the facility. There's a lot of electrical conduit. There's smaller diameter pipes. There's lots of things buried below ground that you don't see when you visit the location. And so this was going to be an evaluation to make sure that we don't identify, or that we identify all areas that the oil may have found from where it was released. Well, the groundwater investigation, similar to the soil investigation, is that we're looking to better define lateral and vertical extent of any impacts. And so to do that, we're going to install a number of shallow wells as well as some deep wells to look both laterally and vertically for impacts. So in addition to the site investigation work plan, there's a number of other activities that we want to complete concurrent with the site investigation. We feel that since the release was discovered 11 November last year, we've done a lot of site investigation work. And so as we complete these additional steps to make the site investigation fulsome, there's a number of other activities that we want to continue to do to keep moving, or keep accelerating remediation at the site. And those consist of some monitoring activities and then also some remedial activities. So the monitoring activities are that we want to continue the surface water sampling and the potable water sampling of residential wells. We plan to do that on a quarterly basis. And so we'll continue, as the health department's advised, to offer sampling to residents that are within a half mile of the facility. And then we'll also continue to collect surface water samples in the agricultural drainage ditch adjacent to the station. The additional remedial plans consist of some additional excavation work. So on further evaluation, we feel that there's some benefit to be gained from additional excavation near the pump house building. And so we plan to begin that in April. We also, if you remember from the last meeting, we had talked about the installation of risers in the excavation that we had created. Some of those risers have accumulated some oil in them. And so our oil recovery plan outlines how we're going to collect oil and manage the oil from those riser pipes that we installed. And then the last plan is we're already thinking ahead to the remedial activities that we'll use at this site to bring us to closure. And we feel, based on the work that we've done, that a soil vapor extraction system is likely going to be the most beneficial. But we have to demonstrate that to the DNR, that that's the system that's going to work the best. And so we put together a plan outlining a pilot project to evaluate how that would work. We haven't submitted the pilot project plan yet to the DNR. We've got it. It's ready to go in. So it'll likely be submitted when I get back to the office on Wednesday. So in a little more detail, the surface water plan will consist of collecting surface water samples at the locations that we established early on last year. The DNR approval of the site investigation work plan also included the surface water sampling plan and the potable water plan. And with the surface water plan, they've recommended that we add an additional drainage ditch sampling location further south from the facility. And so what we'll likely end up doing is shifting one of the sample collection points 150 yards or so south of our south property line. Plan is to do it quarterly. We'll sample for VOCs, and we'll do that in conjunction with the Lake Ripley Management District. Leanna's been out collecting samples side by side with Brad the last couple of times. We'll continue that. and then we'll reevaluate again toward the end of the year once we've completed the site investigation work plan and feel like we really understand everything about the site.
With the service water, we also have some plans. You know, there's the analytical testing that's going to happen, but there's also some general monitoring that we have planned, stream condition, installing a stream gauge to monitor the water level in the ditch as well. So that's forthcoming this quarter as well.
And I should mention, now that Brad's brought that up, with the approval of the site investigation work plan, there's a number of additional requirements and recommendations that the DNR had for our plan. And so we'll be incorporating those into the plan via an addendum, which we will starting to prepare after this meeting. So that'll be going in very soon. And that includes some of the extra things we talked about, shifting the point, the stream gauge, and some other things.
No, back one.
Residential well monitoring. At the last meeting, there was some concern from the audience that attended that meeting about how far from the facility we needed to sample the residential water wells. And so that was a take at the last meeting. With help of the DNR, went to the Jefferson County Health Department. There was an evaluation that was done. The health department came back and recommended that we go with a half-mile radius from the facility as a precaution. And so we've implemented that. We've reached out to the residents within that half-mile radius and actually completed the first quarterly sampling event a week ago Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah, we go yesterday, or tomorrow, from tomorrow. Just to add on that, so the 34 samples that we discussed that we did in January and February doesn't include the samples that we just did within the last few weeks on the ditch and the 11 residential properties. Well, there's one, the sand and gravel pit, so I guess it's not residential, but their water well there, too, was sampled. And we did get all those results back last week, and similar to what we saw in January and February. No detections of any VOCs in any of those samples that were collected. So I know I've seen some faces of some of the residences that we did sample. Similar to everything else that we do with site activities that happen at the facility, we'll give you guys each a notification and a flyer that summarizes your results, so you'll have that record as well, and we'll, you know, contemporaneously we'll get the same similar notification to the DNR. So you guys will all see those in the next couple days, actually. So we're required to get those to you guys within 10 days of us getting results. So you'll see them very, very shortly, summarizing everything in much more detail.
And those will come from our land agent. So if you know David Schultz, or if you've talked with him in the past, that's who the information will come from. All right, next work plan activity was to do some additional excavation work. The excavation work is really going to be focused in the area you see on the screen that's outlined in purple. And that excavation work will really be focused more up against that south-facing portion of the building. We drew the lines a little bigger than we probably intend to work in, just to have that flexibility in case we do find something that we want to chase a little bit. It gives us a little more room. So the primary excavation area is within the pink line. We drew a larger box where we may want to do some additional excavation work once we're out doing potholing, looking for preferential pathways, that sort of thing. And so that's where the green and black line box comes from.
Yeah, and I think the key with the larger box there is to provide us the opportunity during our investigation, if we're drilling with some advanced tooling that's showing us the soil profile as we go down and we may see something, it provides us the opportunity to identify that location. And with the work plan that we've provided, in this area, and if it's feasible for us to do so, provided site conditions like safety or infrastructure, it'll give us the chance to go after that stuff mechanically, right, and get rid of it and get it disposed of and clean up the site further and more aggressively as we identify those areas. So.
Next plan that we've submitted is the oil recovery plan. And so within the orange hatched area, which was our excavation footprint. Before we backfilled that area, we put in a number of 6-inch PVC risers that were perforated the last several feet. And so we're monitoring those. Some of them have accumulated some oil in them. And so we need a plan to be able to remove that oil and collect it and manage it. And so that's really what this plan is all about, is that we'll monitor these. Any oil that accumulates in them, we'll pull the oil. The oil is going to go back to the pipeline, and any contact water that was in those PVC risers will be managed and disposed of at the facility in Illinois. The last plan, which we haven't submitted to the DNR yet, is our soil vapor extraction pilot test plan. And that's really going to be simply to pilot test a small system at the site. They work by pulling a vacuum from wells that were installed. And the vacuum gathers petroleum vapor. It runs through a treatment system. And that's part of the recovery process. As you can see in the picture there, it's all just above the water table. And so we'll trial one of these out there this summer. If it's a successful trial, then we'll look to scale it up to a system that would be large enough to treat the site. So quick summary and next steps. We want to get out and implement the site investigation work plan and the other interim actions that we've outlined in the additional work plans. We want to pilot that SVE system, continue to do our monitoring. There's a lot of reporting now that comes along with the project, so we'll continue to do that. And really probably should have highlighted that next bullet down there, but really working towards successful closure of the site. And all these activities, just to remind everybody again, are going to be under the purview and in accordance with Wisconsin DNR regulations. So that concludes the slide deck. I guess we can go ahead and move into Q&A time.
Okay, all set. So I'm just going to go back and get the list of people.
Yep, and so
Okay, it doesn't look like we had many people that said that they wanted to speak, but if anybody who hadn't indicated they wanted to come up, they're more than welcome to. But we will start with Todd Tootin. If you would like to come up, if you could keep your comments and questions to a minimum.
So first, I've got a couple of slides for Mr. Tutino because he did submit some questions
Oh,
in
okay.
advance. And so I was going to run through. Well, you can come on up if you
Come
want,
on
because you'll be.
When does the 3 minutes start?
As soon as you sit down. No, come
Come on
on.
up.
You can come on up. I didn't realize that you had.
I thought at the same time, but also
We're not going to dock
get
you
to the
for
bottom of my
listening to me
questions,
talk.
since, I'm sure you can answer them. So
So I thought I'd run through your 3 questions first,
yeah,
and then you can grab whichever one you want to, and we'll go from there.
thanks.
So the first question that you had was, does Enbridge have insurance to cover the spill? And the question is, yes, we are insured, and I don't know what the exact volume or amount is, but we have multiple layers of insurance that kick in at certain dollar values of impact. But regardless, Enbridge is responsible for the spill, and so we'll pay for it whether or not we're able to seek any reimbursement from an insurance policy.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, last time you were here, you were asked to provide a certificate of insurance. You didn't do that. Second, as I pointed out, there was a Wisconsin Supreme Court decision that explained in some detail that you have a exclusion in your policy. It's called it's a time limit. You don't have coverage if you didn't discover the leak within 30 days of its occurrence. And it doesn't matter if you discovered it even 31 days later. This leak has been described in your reports to the Department of Transportation as having gone on a very, very long time before it was discovered. So we're kind of all adults here. I gave that to you ahead of the meeting. Please just tell us that it is excluded and you don't have coverage, because otherwise
I'm not an
I'm
insurance
going to lose
expert,
some
so
respect.
I don't know if that's the case or not. But from my perspective, it doesn't matter because we're going to pay for it.
All right,
So
the door may be open just a crack here, but Enbridge is a large company. In fact, it's on Moody's at a BAA. Went down slightly in the last rating. But you have unfunded liabilities that aren't on your balance sheet. You're responsible to decommission this system when it reaches the end of its useful life. That line 6 is 60 years old. So I don't know where Enbridge is going to be in the future. The plume that we're talking about might not create damage or harm to the people that live in the community for years. Insurance is vital, and I still want to have that certificate of insurance. You provided it to the Supreme Court. I'm sure that it's a public document there, but we shouldn't have to drive to Madison and look it up. That's insurance. Thank you.
don't go anywhere. Julie, could you make a note about the insurance certificate? And I'm sure we can get one, and I don't even know if insurance levels would kick in at the dollar value that we're talking about to clean this up. So,
Well, that's not comforting either. I'm talking about insurance to cover the injuries that the public has, not your fixing your pipeline. You know, you have CGL coverage. It was $700 million at the time of the case. It may have been increased. There was a mention made of an application for $840 million.
that's probably in the
But you
ballpark.
won that case, and you brought that case specifically so that you would not be required to add $25 million to your coverage to protect the citizens of Wisconsin from pollution damage. And years from now, I mean, it's a sad story, but there are big companies, Anaconda Copper, the list goes along, that are not here. And we're talking about frightening things that could happen. You're very confident. I hope there's good reason that you're going to clean it up and everything's going to be fine. But things don't always go well. If somebody's grandchildren end up with cancer and they have to turn to coverage and Enbridge, no, insurance is vital. And I would, if you're going to provide any documents, I'd like to see your exclusion page with that.
Yep, well,
I've got it here.
we've got a note. We'll get a hold of
Well,
the
I gave it to
certificate.
you. It's called a time element exclusion. Thank you.
And we'll get one of our insurance. We have a subject matter expert on insurance.
Okay.
You're way out of my wheelhouse talking
I
insurance.
know, but that's why I gave it to you ahead of time. Okay.
Okay. Did you have another
Yep.
question that you had answers
Oh,
for,
no, I've
Mr.
got,
Tuden?
well, he had 3 questions.
Okay.
There's 2 more, and so we
Okay,
move
go
them
ahead.
up there and we'll. All right, so the next question you had was around whether or not we calculated the quantity of product released accurately. And so I want to emphasize that the number, the volume out that we calculated is an estimate, and the estimate was derived based on what we found at the site. So it's based on our visual observations, it's based on the borings that we made, and that's how we came up with our volume. I mean, nobody has read your questioning, but in your question to me, you asserted that you felt we should have measured the leak rate from the pipe and then back calculated to 1973 when the flange was installed and used that as the volume out.
And you didn't
And
measure.
and we didn't do that because we felt there was way too much speculation in that. First, you're speculating that the release occurred in 1973. I don't believe that to be the case. there are many different flow rates on the line. There's different products. There's too many variables to come up with a reasonable answer. And in fact, if we went down that path, our volume out calculation probably would have been much smaller than what we've reported.
Okay. So I think you just said you do not have an observed rate of release prior to repair.
Well, the station was isolated immediately before the
Do you
pipe.
have an observed rate of
Yes, when
release
there was,
prior
when
to
there was
repair?
little pressure on the line, we have an observed rate.
You do.
We have
And-
an observance of leaking.
Right.
Well,
We don't have an observed
not
rate.
to put too fine a point on it, but you told
Well,
the
I mean,
United
you are
States
putting a
Department of
fine point on it.
Transportation that you did have an observed release rate prior to the repair. I would like to see that. I would also like to say, on the flange, this was a single flange that leaked, correct?
Right.
Okay, now, and I'm just covering, a flange is a big, huge end of a metal pipe that flares out. It's held together, in this case, with bolts.
Yep.
Okay, and it's actually narrows down when it comes into the pumping station. It's ordinarily bigger, but this was 30 inches at this flange. And the flange area is often at 350 pounds per square inch pressure, and I guess that varies, right?
It's operating, what's the,
So operating can range from about 370. It could be down as low as 50 if the station is just
Right.
flowing through.
And this
So
flange,
that contributes to the amount of variables as
Right.
Shane was just speaking to
Right.
your question.
and it's leaking when it's at its highest pressure, I'm sure, but let's just go on. This flange was non-threaded, and when you opened it up, it did not have an inner ring. And those flanges are designed to take an inner ring that fits in the groove between the two pieces that are bolted together. And without an inner ring, which the manufacturer specifies, is used and required to prevent leaks. Without an inner ring, you departed from the manufacturer's specification when you put it together. And then you further complicated it by not torquing the bolts to the required tension because you didn't have a torque wrench that was that measured the torque. Now, the flange.
Do you want to give me
Now,
a second?
I'll get to a
Okay.
question here.
Okay.
What you did, apparently, since it is a one leak at one flange, which I wasn't sure of until a moment ago, what you did was take a gasket from someplace else. Now that would ordinarily be called inferior material because it's not specified by the manufacturer for the way this flange came together. And you put that gasket in the flange, and somebody knew it didn't comply with the specs. Then you buried the flange, and then at pressure, in 1973, when you put it underground, the inference is without the inner ring that is designed by the manufacturer to prevent the leak, the inference is it started leaking when you put pressure on it in 73. Now, is that correct? No. But really what I'm saying is it's a prima facie showing. You've got to come forward with something more than you looked around and as you said, we did boring and we did data, and that doesn't tell me anything about how you computed it. The standard practice in the industry is to take when it started to leak and the rate it was leaking at, simple. You didn't do it that way, so you didn't follow the standard way that leaks are calculated, and I would like to know why. You had the rate of release, and you could infer that it started in 73.
why would you infer that?
Because you didn't follow the manufacturer's specifications for
I don't know
preventing
about that.
leaks.
I don't know about that.
Well, I asked for the specifications so I'd be here with an exhibit, and I did not get them. So I can assure you, though,
So
if there is a specification for that. Now, with respect to further information, if you give us the rate of release prior to repair, we can back that into your 6,900 69,000 gallon estimate and come up with a date that you think it originated. You haven't done that either. So, you know, I don't like the fact that you have 69,300 gallons estimated, and I have nothing I can look to see how you got there. Nothing. We're just expected to take you at your word for that.
Yeah, because the way that we calculated the release volume was based on visual information, data gathered at the site.
What
The
visual
pathway you're going
information,
down,
what
you're-
data? What I'm hearing is, we're oil professionals, and this is art in our world. We use the art of our science to come to an estimate, and it may be reasonable.
Well, and this type of release is the most difficult to determine a volume out because
I don't doubt that
it
either.
is weeping over a period of time, and that the rate at which it weeps changes with the type of product that's flowing through the line. There's a ton of variables, and we felt that the way in which we calculated the volume out was the best way to do it based on that which had the most facts associated with it.
I don't doubt that you thought that was best. It did not meet the preferred industry standard, and I think you had the data
What's
to
the
do
preferred
that
industry
other,
standard?
the date the leak originated times the volume leaked, the
Yeah, but what
rate
standard
of
are you talking
release
about?
prior to repair.
What standard? Because I'd like to look at it.
Well, I've got some documents. We'll talk.
Okay.
That's my problem, and you haven't given me anything to enhance my confidence on that number.
Well, if you read the DNR's approval, they have asked for our volume out calculations and our volume recovered
Good.
calculations.
Where are they?
And so when we prepare the addendum, they will be in there for you to look at.
I'm happy to look at them, and I hope that'll take
Yeah,
care
they're
of
very
my
simple.
concern.
Yeah, it's a volume and mass calculation.
Are you preparing a revised estimate on your release?
Nope,
Okay.
nope.
Okay. Go ahead.
Next one. Right, and so then the other question he had was asking whether or not we've actually recovered the 60% of the volume released. And so we use similar math here to come up with the 60%. And so we looked at the footprint of the release as we know it, the thickness of the impacts in the soil subsurface, and we used that to determine that we had removed 60% of the impacted area. And that again is an estimate.
Yeah. Well, what I tried to do to confirm that estimate, you said you lost 69,300 gallons, and
Yep.
you recovered 60% of that. That's 41,580 gallons. Of 41,580 gallons, that's 58 tons. You dumped 2,912 tons in the landfill. So you dumped 158 tons of product in the landfill. And that represents a 5% concentration. Now, I pointed out, and I hope you got an answer to this part, that in Wisconsin there's a statute, 506.105 sub 3, that says, no person may accept for disposal in a landfill untreated petroleum contaminated soil having an average organic compound concentration exceeding 200 milligrams per kilogram. That's a 0.2%.
And that doesn't apply here.
Okay, tell me why. Because I looked for exemptions, I did not find them.
I believe that's part of a landfill operating plan.
It is.
Yeah.
It applies
So
to the
that
landfill.
it doesn't apply to what
Well, if
waste
you-
they can take in for disposal
If you gave them 5% when they can only legally accept 0.2%,
But
they're
they-
going to be very mad at
That's
you.
not a legal issue.
I didn't say it was legal.
Well, you're implying
I'm
it
trying
is.
I'm trying to tell myself if I should believe your numbers. That's all that's going on
Yeah.
here.
So
Yeah.
the 500 code citation is helpful, but it is up to the discretion, generally speaking, up to the discretion of the landfill to accept
It
materials.
doesn't say discretion, it says no person may accept.
That-
Where's the discretion?
So landfills, we don't approve what goes to
I
landfills.
know, and I'm not blaming you.
No, I'm just trying to help.
What I'm saying is, look, either the statute was complied with or it wasn't. And you know, without further information, you know what the rule is when you're looking at something like this? The rule is you assume the law has been obeyed. And if we assume the law has been obeyed, you work that forward, then you deposited 0.2% in that landfill.
Okay, so why?
And that is far and gone away from a 5% concentration.
So you did the math. Why would anyone dispose of something in a landfill at that concentration? You're talking, what do you say, 200
because
milligrams?
it's contaminated, because that's what the
but-
landfill, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I'm not the one answering the questions.
Well,
With respect, if you dumped 5% in the landfill, you certainly have a soils test that confirms that those
so-
spoils contain 5%.
we did profile sampling.
I
which we-
saw the 13 samples.
Well, no,
No,
those are different.
Okay, I do not have any other sample.
So the 13 samples were collected from the floor of the excavation
And-
afterwards, and
and
those
they're-
aren't representative of what was disposed of.
I agree with you. In
Yeah.
other words, those samples, the only ones that I find from the spoils, and I realize they were done for a different purpose.
Correct.
I'm just saying, they will not support your 60%.
No, and-
Follow me? Yeah, so.
no, and I'm
if-
saying it's not
if
the
you have-
60%.
If you have a soils test that says those trucks that started carrying that had 5% concentration, then I'd like to see it, and then I may agree with you.
Okay, so the 60% is based on volume. It's not based on analytical. It's based on volume of soil that was removed. We know that, so 60% of the impacted area has been removed.
No.
Yeah,
You read any newspaper account, you told everybody, and man, the Cambridge News went to town.
yeah, it
with
said 60% has been recovered.
60% of
yeah.
our product that we lost has already been
Yeah,
recovered.
so that's 60% of the footprint.
60%, so it's not 60% of
Of the volumetric
6,900,
footprint.
300 gallons that you recovered?
Yes.
It's 60% of whatever happened on that footprint?
Yep.
Well, you should tell the Cambridge News. Test results at Enbridge spill site show limited contamination. I mean, you got some great press on telling them that you had recovered 60% of the product that you lost.
I think you're preferentially selecting your articles
Oh, definitely.
for the good
But
press. yeah.
I'm telling you, there's none that say you didn't recover 60%.
Yeah, and it's an estimate. We estimated that we
Well, an
recovered
estimate that
60%.
it doesn't even tie
Yeah.
to the 69,300 gallons.
Yes,
That's
it
not
does.
an estimate of what you recovered.
Yes, it is.
69% of what? You took tonnage out, 2,912 tons.
Yep.
All right. 60% then of what is recovered? The oil that was in that section that you cut out?
Of our estimated release volume, we believe we recovered 60% of it through the excavation.
Now you're using your estimated release volume.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to stress to you that the release volume is an estimate, the recovered
So-
volume is an estimate.
So we should
and you're
have known that
fixated
you
on
talked
accurate
about.
numbers.
I apologize for talking over you. We should have known that you were talking about 60% of the product that happened to be in the 2,912 tons that you took out of the ground.
No.
Is that
No.
what?
No, I'm saying 60% of the release volume was contained in the volume of material that we excavated from the backside of the pump station.
60% of the
Yes.
released volume.
Yes.
So 60% of
So-
69,300 gallons was in those trucks that went to the landfill.
I think what
I
might be
can't
help-
get there. We're
No,
back
I
to
think
where
what
we
might be helpful
started.
is to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, because even following this is, we're talking about multiple things, and we can talk about each one, but as long as we're clear on what we're talking about, if we're quantifying a release volume, if we're quantifying the footprint of the excavation or the entire process, I think we just, no matter what we talk about, we need to be very clear what exactly we're
Well,
talking
now that
about.
you clarified it, which is it?
Well, I'm asking everyone to, if you want to talk about what the 60% means, is that the footprint, or is that the volume? Is that 69,000?
Well,
I'm just trying to help
It was
for us to.
represented, it was 60% of the overall volume estimate.
Okay.
Now, am I wrong?
Oh,
Did
no,
I
but
read it wrong?
No, but I want to make sure that we're all clear that if that's
Well,
what we're
I'm
referencing.
not clear. That's why I'm asking. Did
Yeah,
I read
well,
it wrong?
and don't just ask me. Ask everyone that are here, so we know what we're talking about.
I'll take an answer from anybody.
Well, it's
The
not.
DNR should know that.
Well, it's not. It's not mine to answer. It's if we're talking
Can I ask
60.
you a question?
You can ask me a question, and I will either take it to somebody that has the facts, or I'll help sort through it. If we're talking 60% of 69,000 of volume, we could talk about that. If it's if 60% of a footprint that is excavated out, that's different. And I'm not saying that's what we're discussing. I'm just trying to keep us organized so we're all understanding what we're describing.
Raise your hand if you understand what we're asking. Was it 60% of the overall gallons that were lost?
Yes.
You've recovered.
Yes.
Yes.
So 60% in gallons.
All right. Then the landfill had to be 5%. Do you
Yep.
have a test that shows that it was 5% concentration?
Well, no, and I guess I'm coming from the
Then
number
how
side
did
of
you
things.
determine it?
It was based on the volumetric and the ratios, right? So from the total volume of released, the excavations we completed, extrapolating to what's underneath the buildings, which we don't know. We just can't get to it, right? So you take those uncertainties in there. We take the volume of soil removed from the excavation, plus the oily water that was disposed of, and that's the gallons that went to the petroleum contact water that was disposed of. So when we look at all that, we come up with our 60% number of the 2913 tons.
Right.
So that's where it comes from.
We're done talking about that.
But we
You
don't
said
have data.
You
'cause we
recovered
don't-
60% of this, call it 70,000 gallons.
Yeah.
But you could only put 0.2% in the landfill.
You can't.
But
No,
didn't
that doesn't
apply.
apply.
That's a false
That-
premise.
That didn't
That doesn't
apply.
apply.
Somehow they were exempt.
It,
But
so,
But where is the soil test I need to convince me that you carried trucks with 60% of 69,300 gallons?
So we've tried to do this in the past at other sites where we've tried to analyze the amount of oil in soil that's going to a landfill.
Yeah.
And so we've collected a whole bunch of samples, and what we found out is that there's a lot of variability in every sample that you collect. And so you get to the end with this summation of all these samples that you've collected, and from a statistical perspective, you have this huge confidence interval, which doesn't help you get to determine how much oil actually went out in the soil.
Where are those numbers? Where's that calculation?
We didn't do the calculation here.
In this spill, you didn't do the calculation?
No,
Then how do we get to 60%?
because it's based on the volume of material removed from the impacted area.
Okay, I think we're all the way around the bush. Why don't we go on? Is that the end of?
That's the end of your questions, unless you've got
Yes.
more questions.
I
Can
I think
somebody- Go ahead.
I think we need to move on just to have other people
do
ask
too.
their questions, and then when there's time left, we'll circle back.
I'll talk afterwards.
Okay, great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Tuden.
And I do want to thank all of you for coming. I really do appreciate this. I think it's very important.
We'll stick around afterwards if you want to chat some more.
Okay. Georgia Gomez-Ibanez, would you like to come up and ask? You don't?
I have
Do-
a concern.
Well, please sit down and voice your concerns.
My concern is that your newer line pumping station pipes are all above ground, but the one that failed was deep underground because that's the way you did things when it was installed. I would be so much happier if what is now underground again would be reconfigured so that it was above ground like the newer ones, so that you could monitor it more carefully.
so I'll take that one.
Sure.
So obviously you're aware there's a huge expense with the construction of a pumping station.
Yes.
And,
very aware of it.
and Enbridge, just like anybody else, is a business. But that's something that our facilities integrity program looks at, is the refurbishment and upgrades, if you will, and replacement of pumping stations, lines, joints. That's why they run the pipeline inspection tools. That's something that they take statistical analysis, looks at across our entire system, and based on a risk approach, the higher the risk is, the sooner it gets addressed. So I can't give you when that's going to happen, if it's going to happen, but know that that is something our facilities integrity program does look at.
Repeat the question. I don't think I really follow.
Basically the question, and if I'm not summarizing this correctly, let me know. The question was, our newer lines, such as line 14 at Cambridge Station, the valves for that station are above ground. They're contained within the pump house. That station was built in 1996. The line 6 station, which is where this release occurred, was built in 1968, 1970, with an addition in 71, 72. The construction guidance at that time was to have buried valves with the pipes for the header of the station and for the valves being underground. That allows your pump house to be lower and allows your motors to be more serviceable at ground level. If you look in the 14 pump house, all the motors and everything are about 10 to 12 feet up in the air because those valves are sitting on the ground level. Does that make sense to everybody? So as things have changed through time, more's been learned, more's been looked at, and there's trade-offs. Like our new 61 pump stations, those are even higher. And some of the knowledge has gone back to bringing those pump stations back to a lower level as far as where the pumps are off of the ground to allow us easier access, allow us more serviceability. So it sort of run the gamut, just like a lot of other designs and other industries have the same things.
I'm just concerned that it's not so easy to monitor when it's underground.
The vintage sites and potholes.
I think probably most of the people in this room would feel really great if you rebuilt it.
Right, and I completely understand where you're coming from, but you also need to understand we have a lot of safety features, not only in the pump station design, even of that vintage, but overall of the site. We've gone through, in the last meeting, we talked about the Sentinel wells that we have.
Yep.
Those have been in place since, what is it, Shane?
2002.
2002.
That we've been monitoring. In the station itself, you have a flow meter on line 6. You have pressure transmitters. You have gas detectors in the pump house. All those are safety items to ensure that we don't have a release.
Yes, but those systems didn't work in this case.
I understand. The release that we had was very hard to detect. You're talking about a very small, minute leak. When you talk about the release that we had over time, we're talking about 69,000 gallons, which our estimate is that translates into 1,650 barrels.
Right.
Right? We ship on that line daily 300,000 barrels.
I do realize all that. I'm just saying.
I understand.
This is a problem that because it was such a slow, small leak, it wasn't detected by all the things in place that one would have hoped it would detect. And so if it were above ground, it would have been detected because you would have seen a small, slow leak.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do appreciate you being here.
Were there any other residents that would like to come up and make a comment or have a question? Please come up.
Thanks for coming, you guys.
Jimmy?
Couple of questions I had. So I want to get back to the flange. Is it true that there was no gasket in the flange and there was supposed to be a gasket in the flange, according to the manufacturer?
There was a gasket in the flange. There was a gasket that was present in the flange when we took it apart.
Okay, so is it possible we could get some kind of print of this flange and how it's supposed to be put together and the correct torque specs for this flange? Is that information available?
I don't know if that's proprietary or not, but if it's not, I'm sure it's something that we could do as a takeaway.
Because we've heard there's no gasket, there's been a gasket, it's been missing. Is there a way to?
I will tell you for sure there was a gasket in that flange.
Okay.
I watched it come out.
Okay.
There was a gasket 100% in that flange. And a new gasket was inserted into that flange, and then it was retightened to our torque specs. As far as the torque specs of 1970 and the torque specs of today, obviously things have changed. Our torque equipment has changed. You have a lot more refined equipment and ability to gauge exact torque now versus 1970.
I understand that. So you talked about the flange being very expensive, probably impossible at this time to put above ground, but what can happen is the monitoring of all the flanges that are underground. And we know we can do a better job at that. Do we agree to that?
So that, and you and I have had this conversation. That's something that our facilities integrity program is looking at, not only at this station, but across our entire system. Not sure what the results of that are yet, but as of right now, that is something they have in their court to look at.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way that we should accept the fact that, would you say 1,600 barrels leaked out, and we weren't able to detect it out of that flange.
So
Because it was underground and is not visible. Now, thank you for giving us that tour, because I was able to see the flanges that are, obviously, that are above ground and how easy they're accessible and what a difference that makes. But since they are underground, there's got to be a way. You guys you gotta come up with a way that can be monitored where there can't be a leak without detecting it.
Yep, and just to talk to that a little bit, we did go to all the stations in our system that were of the same vintage, same construction, and we actually potholed down next to the flanges and put a riser pipe similar to the white riser pipes that we have in the release area next to those flanges, and there was no detection of any hydrocarbons in any of those. So all signs point to that this was a one-off, if you will, this flange. But that's something that was done across our system just to ensure that we didn't have the same issue anywhere else.
So if that leak would happen again at another location with an underground flange, or just say at this location, how quickly would that be able to be detected with what you currently have in place?
So the pipes that we have buried at other locations, that's part of our weekly rounds for our technicians to make. They'll actually take the cap off those pipes and look down in that pipe, and you would have odor, obviously, if there was a petroleum release there.
So weekly?
Weekly.
Is there any way we could get daily?
I can't promise daily because our technicians are at other sites in some cases. They don't exclusively live at one site. If some of our work takes multiple people to occur, but we do weekly rounds. And when the technicians are on site, they're probably checking it more frequently than that.
They can't be automated where some kind of a sensor would trigger a light or a buzzer or
Again, that is something that our facilities integrity program is looking at, whether that risk justifies what the cost of that is and what drawbacks there are to that technology. Because there are some drawbacks to that technology too. If there's a water table issue, it could trigger that unnecessarily, where you're going to trigger every week because of a water table issue or something like that. Again, that's not my expertise. I'm operations, but we do have people that have that expertise in our facilities integrity program.
Hard questions, but I like
No
to
problem.
see it fixed. Thank you guys
Yep.
for coming. Thank you.
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you guys for being here. I'm sure it's not easy at times. We appreciate it anyway. So in the letter dated March 21st, I believe that you had sent, there were a list of things that you had requested that I think would somehow help us if we were able to get that documentation when you get it. One was submit the documentation showing the volume of release or how the volume was calculated, and there's been a lot of discussion. I don't need to beat a dead horse about that, but that tells me that, you know, there is a standard to measure or estimate these things, and we need to see what that is and how you arrived at it. The item 4, the volume of release material by excavation. And again, Mr. Tootin commented about that. You're asking for that. I hope that we will be able to see that and see as measured by certain, you know, I want to see a math equation, okay, and a standard that's used. Item 5 was the chemical composition documentation of the released materials. So the fingerprint, I guess, is that what you'd call it, of the materials? And that was requested. Right?
Yeah, that's a method we can use. It's analytical testing, gas chromatograms and different analytical runs that would be presented, yeah.
Okay, so we definitely like to see, you know, what was there. People have asked, at the prior meeting in January, people asked about the use of corrosion inhibitors. And a typical VOC test would not detect a corrosion inhibitor present, is that correct?
Yeah, but there are no corrosion inhibitors in this line. And so after the fact, in talking with others, we're trying to figure out why people thought there was a corrosion inhibitor used.
I didn't think
And-
he said he thought there was. He asked if there was because
Yeah.
apparently it is a common practice among companies like yours to use a corrosion inhibitor. So he was looking for clarification about what you do or how you manage the inhibition of corrosion.
Yeah, and so there is no corrosion inhibitor
No.
used.
Yeah, there's no corrosion inhibitor used, and how we control corrosion is we have cathodic protection, same as your large ships do on ocean-going water. They're made of metal, right? And salt water is very corrosive to metal, so they use cathodic protection to protect those ships and have it attack the cathodes, sorry,
That's all right.
instead of, which are sacrificial instead of the metal of the ship. So basically we use the same technology, and that is monitored through our cathodic group. So our lines have cathodic protection, all the lines do. In fact, next week there's another survey for it.
Is there documentation that you can show us that is the case with line 6 since it's so old?
Yes,
Okay.
I mean
That would be very helpful.
there's records, and actually part of our regulation through PHMSA is when we have PHMSA audits, they actually check those cathodic records, not only the records, but when we're in the field doing the field portion, they're actually checking cathodic reads. We
Okay.
have a cathodic person that goes along with us on the PHMSA audits. So all that's already been in place for years.
Okay. So it would be helpful if you could provide documentation that would show or state that that is the process that you use, so that when people ask, it's not simply accepting a yes or no answer.
Okay.
I don't mean to be mistrusting, but I think we all know that it's much easier to comprehend something and believe it if if statistical information or standards and things are provided for people to be able to read or use as they see fit. So thank you for doing that. The water tests, and thank you again for, working on the half-mile radius. I appreciate that. I think a lot of people here appreciated the fact that you were willing to work with us on that. Will the water test detect any VCIs, or is it just VOCs? Pardon?
VCI?
The volatile corrosion inhibitor.
Oh.
I know you said you don't use it, but if a test.
I would have to go look at a corrosion inhibitor and see what the constituents are
Yeah.
to determine whether or not we can detect it.
Yeah, there's a
with
few
the
different
VOC
ones.
test.
I'm happy to share that with you
Okay.
if you'd like, but I'm sure you have access to your own. So that again would be something that would be comforting to people who doubt and wonder. That's a big hang up because a corrosion inhibitor is not organic and therefore will not break down like an organic material will, and I only know enough about that to be dangerous, so I think I can understand why they're concerned about that. And if it's simple enough to provide a test that would detect something of that nature, then we should expect you to do that. Thank you. Let's see. There was also a note about there was an extra well, or where did that go here? Oh, this paper. Okay, so the work plan proposes 10 shallow wells and then 4 deep wells, as well as 1 deep investigative boring. Can you explain a little more about that and where that would be?
Yeah, so we've got, and sorry the screen's a little small, but
Yeah.
yeah, so the 10, are you asking specifically about the deep boring?
Yes.
Yep, so there's a maybe Shane, you can just run over, it's right beneath that shed there, the purple. Yeah.
Okay.
So that'll be a deep boring, and it's commonly done in a lot of remediation investigations to better understand the subsurface, lithology all the way going down to bedrock. So the intention with this boring here would be to, we call it tag bedrock. We don't expect us to be drilling through bedrock here. At about 40 feet-ish below ground, there's a limestone layer here in this region. So the purpose of that boring is going to be to go down and better characterize the soil characteristics all the way going down. And I don't want to get too technical with things, but there's fluctuations through the soil profile, all the way down to the bedrock, right? So your topsoil, but we'd be checking it out all the way down. Maybe there's clay in there or some different, what we call confining areas, which maybe it perches some water up higher or keeps water a little lower. So really the purpose of the deep boring is just to get a better conceptual understanding of the soil characteristics and lithology all through the site profile.
So you've got a good,
Yep,
a good
yep.
profile of what is beneath okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Let's see, the soil extraction. It looked like there were 25 boreholes sealed, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, it looked like they were filled with bentonite,
Correct.
is that right?
Yes. Yep.
Chips? Okay, why were
Correct.
they sealed? Are you,
We abandoned them. So
Okay.
when the incident first happened, and then in December, we did a shallow soil and groundwater investigation across the site. So during that investigation, we had a driller come out in a drill rig, and they advanced a specialized tooling through the drill rig, and it's about 1.25 inches, and it has little lasers and lights that emit out as it drills down, or we could see if there's any indications of contamination all across the site. So we kind of checkerboarded the whole site in the southeast corner of the facility, which was the direction of shallow groundwater flow at the site. But we did that investigation, and after we did the drilling, which is more so just a probing, we weren't really drilling, it was pushing a probe down. When we removed the probe, we installed what's called temporary monitoring wells in there. So our work plan calls for monitoring wells to be installed, but those are going to be installed per the DNR code. These temporary wells are smaller in diameter. They're still constructed of PVC, and they have little slots where water can come in. But they're more for providing a general snapshot, something we can get really quick, and something we could do quickly to understand what the condition of the groundwater is at the site. And we could do it quickly, and we could get a ton of coverage. But they're not something meant to stay in place for longer-term monitoring.
Okay.
So we pulled them out in January, and then when we pulled them out, the PVC came out, and to abandon it, we plugged it with bentonite, which is a recognized abandonment material. It's clay, essentially.
Okay.
So that was the purpose for doing that.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. That's
It's a
very
DNR
helpful.
requirement
Yeah, I was reading
for
it.
them to abandon. And bentonite's the most common. They're like these little chips. Then
Yeah.
they get poured down, and then they are hydrated and fills and seals the hole to prevent any other contaminants from potentially
Kinda looks like
impacting the
rice.
subsurface. Yeah.
Kinds of
Yeah.
rice. Yep.
Okay. Well, it's good to know what that was all about. Let's see. The last, I think, tested there. Oh, you know, Mr. DiGidio asked about the flange as well. And as I understand it, the flange that was installed was not the ring that would have normally been installed at that point when the pipeline was originally put together at that spot. And it's my understanding, based upon what I've read, that the gasket was, if you will, aftermarket or off the shelf, and not necessarily one that was supplied by the manufacturer. Can you confirm?
So I will say gasket technology has changed from 1970 till
Sure.
now.
Absolutely.
I can't confirm or deny what gasket was put in because I wasn't even born in 1970, to be honest.
Oh.
But
I don't want to hear that.
but I am sure that we're governed and regulated at that time, just like we are now. So we would have had a regulated piece of material that was put into the pipeline. The gasket that was put in as a replacement when this leak was repaired, or when the release was repaired, was a spiral wound gasket.
Yes, you said it was a superior
Yep.
gasket compared to what was in
And,
place.
and those, just even now, those gaskets don't ship like one for one with a flange. Those gaskets are something that we have a box of a dozen, or whatever they come in, based on whatever size it is and whatever rating the pipe has, which is a class of pipe, and they're put in the correct position. It's no different than, trying to think of a good analogy, I guess, but
But there's a difference between the ring and a gasket, technically, right?
they're both
They have
considered
the same
gaskets.
purpose.
They're both gaskets.
Uh-huh.
They both seal a flange.
Right.
So that, I don't know what term you're using for ring.
That was a term I believe you used when we toured the site, and you were talking about the new part that was put in was superior to original, and then everybody's always referred to the part that was put in because the original ring was missing. They referred to that as a gasket, so that makes me believe they're two different things. But-
It's the same item. It basically is the part that's in between the two mating surfaces of the flange.
Right.
So you can imagine, and you were out there, we should looked at what a flange is. So, but for other people in the room, you have two pieces of pipe that have a bolt pattern on the outside. Those bolts are put together, and in between there, there's a buff face on each of the pipes, and that buff face has a piece of material in between it that the bolts compress to seal the pipe to those buff surfaces.
So, and I understand what you're saying, but I also, you know, in the fields that I work in, you know, if you don't supply a specific part that is a manufacturer has specified to do something critical, like seal something of that nature that could produce a leak of 69,000 gallons, which is a drop to you, but significant to us, that can be a huge liability. And I think that's where, you know, our concern is. You were asked if the other, first of all, there's just one flange in this in Cambridge, right?
So
One buried?
No, there are multiple buried flanges. However,
Okay.
that is only on the extension where Unit 4 is. The other joints are welded connections.
Okay, so there's one flange area with a gasket or a ring.
So
that connection.
there are I believe 6 flanges that have a bolted connection versus a
Related.
welded connection
For line 6.
for line 6.
Okay, and they are
At-
all underground?
Underground, correct.
And we've checked all of them
They were checked for torque, yes.
for leaking?
When we
Okay.
did the site investigation,
Okay.
they were all exposed, yes.
Okay, and we replaced, and the one that didn't have the ring or the gasket or was replaced,
The one that the gasket was replaced in,
Okay.
we torqued that one also. In addition, our facilities integrity program is coming back this year. That's why we backfilled the excavation area with sand, and they're going to recoat the pipe, and they're talking about looking at those gaskets again for replacement rather than just retorquing.
okay. That would make sense. I mean, I would wonder why Enbridge would not want to go through and replace all of those gaskets in the lines that you have where they were used, since we already have one failure and there's opportunity for so many more. I know you mentioned that it's very expensive, but has anyone done a cost-benefit analysis of what that would cost?
And that's where our facilities integrity program is coming in and
Mhm.
looking at those risks and looking at what they need to do to make that right.
Can they supply that information to us?
What do you mean?
Well, I would like to see what the cost-benefit analysis is of replacing them versus just leaving them as they are buried.
I don't think it's that they're doing a cost-benefit analysis of replacing them versus leaving them buried and not doing anything.
Mhm.
They're looking at what the risk is of, it's a risk-based model more than a cost-benefit based model. So what's the risk of another flange failure? What's a risk of a gasket failure?
So that, at this point,
The-
is it
they're-
fair to say they don't feel the risk is great enough?
That they are coming back in 2025
Okay,
because that is why we backfilled it with sand.
okay,
And they are recoating the pipeline and they are looking at the gaskets.
okay. When we toured your safety, you
Yeah,
You
and
did-
I didn't know that
Yeah,
information
okay.
at that time.
All right.
That's something that we just got back from facilities integrity. We knew that they were coming back for recoating, but
Okay.
The-
Are they considering moving those areas above ground, the ones that are non-welded?
that I am not aware of them considering that. And that would be a significant cost right now.
Of course.
Yeah.
But it's also a significant cost to clean this up.
It is,
And,
yep.
yeah, and down the road, people with property, you know, that they want to sell, if something turned up,
And-
they're screwed. I'm
So,
sorry.
so I will say that to move those valves above ground, it not only requires actually moving the pipe, but it actually requires increased buildings, increased footprint, increased height, because if you leave those valves just out in the winter when we get super cold temperatures, you're gonna have possibility of some of those valves not moving as easily as they would when they're underground or in a pump house, right?
What about a raised chimney type area that is situated around where you can have a clear view of what's underneath to be able to see whether or not something is leaking?
So
I-
I will say that that is something facilities integrity is looking at as far as how they're going to look after these valves. And that's not only just to this site exclusively, it's to our system. So that's something that that's in their court and expertise.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. Hopefully they're trying to get creative with that. The wells, the properties within a half-mile radius of your site, it looked like several had been done, tested. Several existing wells have been tested, which is great. Are there any properties left in that area that don't necessarily have existing wells, but may in the future have an owner who would like to have their water tested? Or is that not something that one would consider reasonable?
Yeah, I would say we wouldn't consider that at this time. So we look at the potable water testing as temporary. And so once we complete the site investigation work plan, we'll reassess the need to continue that program.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Is there any other resident that would like to speak, ask a question? Okay.
Hi, these are maybe more straightforward for you guys than some past questions. So my understanding is these valves that we're all talking about are really concentrated at the site. We don't have these valves every 100 feet or 1,000 feet or...
So there's two different components to the pipeline. There's the main line and then there's the station. So the main line is 99.9% welded connections. There are what are called remote valve sites that are between every 8 and 12 miles. Two examples of those are on either side of the Rock River in Fort Atkinson. You have valves, and what those are designed to do is if there is a release, those valves can shut and prevent any release into the river. But all those valves are electronically controlled from our control center. But to your question, there are valves along the main line, and those valves have their own footprint and are in the site.
And I'm sure you guys are aware of this, that fairly if we have one failure, then these are 50-old pipes, so there's probably going to be another failure coming up.
So there's a difference between the main valve and the station also. The main line, I should say. The main line you can run what are called pipeline inspection tools, and those are run on a regular basis. And there's two different types of pipeline inspection tools. One is a cleaner, which you can think of as a big spatula that goes down the line, and it's pushed by the pressure of the product behind it. And basically, if there's anything in the line, any debris or anything like that, it catches that debris and pushes it along. The other is a pipeline inspection tool, and that uses basically like an MRI technology, and that can see anything from an anomaly of a rock that through frost heave cycles has contacted the pipeline, or let's say there's a scratch in the coating, underground coating on the pipeline. It can detect those. Those are noted as far as what location in the pipe they are. That report is analyzed, and then we have a digs crew, which actually will go up and dig up the anomaly, and if it's like, let's say a scratch in the coating, they'll actually recoat the pipe there. If it's something that requires them to do additional work on the pipeline, they may sleeve it, which is actually taking two halves of a pipe that's slightly larger, putting those over, clamping them together, and then welding out the edges and the longitudinal sleeve. seams.
Was that inspection done for the flange that failed?
The flange that failed was in the station.
So
Those
that-
pipeline inspection tools can't run through the station because the bends are so sharp in the station. The pipeline inspection tools are approximately 20 feet long.
All right.
Does
And
that
then-
answer your question?
Yes, that does.
Okay.
Yeah, my biggest fear is all this effort, there's gonna be another failure on a 50-year-old line that everybody's gonna look stupid if that happens, right?
Right.
So if I want to, just want to feel better that, Enbridge is understanding that this is all 50 years old, things have to be replaced, and we're making efforts to
Yeah.
do that.
And we do run tools on a regular basis. And that's not only for line 6, we run them on all the lines.
And then the second thing is regarding the slide that's on the screen, I guess I just want to make sure everybody understands. My interpretation is all the contaminated soil underneath the building is going to be there essentially forever.
The building is not going to be raised at this time.
Right, so,
Correct.
well, until at some point,
Yeah.
100 years in the future.
Yeah, so, and with the soil vapor extraction remediation system that we're proposing to install there, it will help on the perimeter and the periphery of those contaminated areas underneath infrastructure where like the concrete footings are. But another thing that we have to do when we go through this remediation process, and in conjunction with the DNR, we'll put together these reports. We'll report back after years, potentially years of the system running and the remediation taking place. And we'll evaluate all that data, but down the road, when we come to a closure for what happens at this facility, we'll get a letter from the DNR that might explain in very detailed bullets or items what our continuing obligations may be for a facility like this, whether Enbridge owns it at the time or if another pipeline operator buys it in the future. Whoever the owner is responsible for taking care of those continuing obligations. So what that might mean is, say someone down the road buys the property or Enbridge decides to tear down the pump house. When that happens, you now become responsible for continuing the cleanup and removing any residual contaminated material that you might get to. So it all becomes part of the property's deed and the nature of what might happen in the future. But to answer your question, in short, right now, what is underneath those buildings will remain. That can't be extracted via the soil vapor extraction. But we're going to have these monitoring points all around, right? That's the purpose of the monitoring wells and the other things that we're installing, is to make sure if something does have to stay underneath a building, it's staying there. It's not going down, it's not going out, it's staying there. And if there are any indications that we see contamination in the future or we didn't see it before, the DNR has every right to tell us to reopen the site and for us to come back and do even more. So that's kind of the
Right.
checks and balances there
So,
with that.
because we have that contaminated soil there for a long period of time, your system's going to be monitoring it, maybe extracting some of it.
Mhm.
But your point is it's not going to go straight down, it's going to probably hit your wells laterally at some point. At that point, that'll trigger something that if you need to go underneath that building, the DNR has the authority to tell you to do that.
As a part of what could be a continuing obligation.
Right.
As a condition of closure, if this building ever comes down, you'll have to, address the contamination that's
Right.
residual.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you. Please come up.
Hello. This, I guess, could go to anyone in the group there. So in relation to all this material that is now under the building, has there been structural analysis done on the building so that we can be certain that footings haven't been undermined and the building might shift, which would put new pressures on the rest of the existing piping that's underneath?
So, I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not a civil engineer.
Sure.
So I'll just answer this as far as my knowledge. But basically, we haven't, the release itself hasn't changed the composition of the soil per se as far as what type of soil it is. I mean, it's still the same sandy loam.
But now it has a
ju-
bunch of petroleum residing in it. So does that have the same structural integrity as when that building was built.
And I can't answer that. That's something we could take away to
And
our
that's my
civil
question is,
department.
has that been looked at?
That's something that we can take away here.
I will say too, you know, and I'm coming from environmental purely on this, not even from the technical engineering side of it, but when we were out there digging mechanically to excavate this material that we could get to and remove, we were limited, and it's included in some of the reports that we put together about how much we could remove without jeopardizing any integrity to the infrastructure that was at the facility. And that's kind of why when you look at that map, there's some of those clean lines right on the edge there, was because there was consultation with some of the building engineers that said, okay, hey, you know, we don't want to undermine here, so stop at this point.
Well, you could undermine it if you added
And that's the
additional
questions
footing
that
and
we had
supports,
asked to
right?
those folks, is what is allowable in this situation to not compromise any safety considerations.
Or maybe do some work so that you can do more work underneath there to recover that material. That would be my advice. And what impact should we anticipate with now we're going to be in a wet season? Since this leak was detected, we've been with frozen ground and very dry. Now that we're getting into a time of the year when we're going to be seeing, you know, the majority of the rain that we get during the course of a year, should we anticipate seeing this plume spread?
You know, I think in short, the answer is, you know, from what we removed such a large mass amount, you can kind of think of it as the head, pressure head being removed there, where there's really not much high confidence that anything's going to be moving. We're left with, I guess, what you can consider maybe a smear zone, where there is the fluctuations of the shallow groundwater table annually or through, you know, different climate cycles, droughts, you know, extended wet periods, where it does move up and down. So we have seen some of the changes already, you know, seasonally that we see all the time. But with the amount that we removed and what we know already about the site with the investigations that we've already done and what we will be implementing to monitor any migration, you know, I wouldn't say that the footprint is going to be growing at all.
So the soil that was removed, was it all just bare soil, or did it have concrete on top that would have somewhat protected that?
No, most of it was just direct from the surface. You know, gravel, driving layer, people to get around,
Okay.
and then, you know, maybe 12 inches of gravel, and then right into just unconsolidated,
Okay.
unsaturated soil zones.
And then another question, the vapor recovery system you mentioned that is going to be put in, and you mentioned it was a trial.
Pilot,
So,
yep.
so this means that this is a system that's not been used before? This was your first leak Enbridge has had, so you've never had an opportunity to use a system like this?
No, we've used them a number of times. Carl's got a lot of experience with them.
So why is this a trial?
Well, because that's part of the process that we have to work through with the DNR, is we have to prove that this technology is going to work at the site before we
At
can
the
implement
site,
it.
so it's
Yeah.
the site-specific thing?
Site-specific, yep. We need
All
to,
right.
yep.
Okay, and then once the repair was made, was there a detection in the flow rate that could be seen? Like, is that one of the ways that you would determine how much material was lost based on the change after it was fixed?
So the amount of product that was releasing was not detectable as far as with your flow rate. As I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
the total release was 1,650 barrels. And that was over an extended time period, right?
Okay,
And that line flows 300,000 barrels.
okay.
So it's a small, minute amount compared to what we're flowing daily.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
Please come up.
Hi.
Hi.
I know that you guys are saying that you think that it's not going to spread and it's not going to go any further than within the area. But once it does hit the water table and it does go, what are you doing? How are you going to protect us? Is Enbridge going to be here in 30, 40, 50 years when there is an issue with the lake? What's going to happen then?
Because you're talking about it, that there isn't a problem, that you took the soil out, you got 60% of it, and you're going to contain it all. But what if you don't? What happens? What happens to our lake? What happens to our wells? Who's going to be here? You won't provide proof of insurance, and if Enbridge isn't here down the road, who takes care of us?
We could actually
I could talk
take
a little about environmental liabilities.
Well, and our job is to oversee the investigation and remediation. So we'll continue to assess their work plans for the investigation at the site and the remediation that they've already discussed. And we'll continue doing that as they continue to investigate. And once we have a site investigation report, that'll show us the concentrations we have of contamination in all media in 3 dimensions. So we'll see we have this area of soil contamination, we have this area of groundwater contamination, and we have it fully defined. And then we'll look at trends in groundwater so that we feel comfortable that we know where it is now and we know that it's not going to be migrating off-site or it's not going to be migrating any further. And only then do we close the site with those continuing obligations that Brad has discussed.
That still doesn't answer my question.
So
If something happens, who takes care of us?
And I don't know if this is maybe just another piece, but I want to try to be as helpful as possible. That environmental, and there's questions that I don't know if any of us could answer, how many years down the line, but in general, environmental issues, like environmental liabilities, there's no statute of limitations or timeline on it. It doesn't.
If
It
they're
doesn't.
not a company.
Well, right, but the point I'm making, and I know there are unknowns that none of us can answer on that, but it would, responsibility, unless there's some type of third-party agreement that the DNR may or may not be privy to along the lines, any company, buyout, property owner of the property would carry those environmental responsibilities forward.
So
And it's just a hypothetical example of kind of how responsibility can be passed through property transactions. So my point in bringing that up is there's still that level of safety and security in place that the department or whatever regulating agency at 60 years down the line or whatever it is would have to make sure that if there's monitoring or environmental work that needs to be followed up on, it is. There's no, it doesn't expire technically. Excuse me.
It's so, it's hard to believe anyone in any area, in my view, to trust any of you guys, to trust the government, to trust anyone, because there's so much crap that's going on. And I want to know that my grandchildren aren't going to develop cancer down the road if the lake does become polluted. My husband's family has been here for almost 90 years. And I don't want to see, we don't want to see it destroyed, and I want to be protected. You were asked if you would pay for groundwater, for well testing, and you said only if the health department ordered you to do it. Well, now you've done it in a half-mile radius. What about all the people around the lake? You're not going to foot the bill for $135 for people to have their wells tested? Actions speak larger than words. So you might think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any other resident like to come up? Seeing none, any non-resident, would you like to come up and ask a question? Please. Well, then we could all hear you with the microphone. It's okay.
Some of these you might have covered. Hi, I have read a lot of Shane's stuff. And Brad, you are prolific.
Yes, he is.
Read every one.
It's a team.
However, my memory's not as good as it used to be. What are you running through line 6? Don't tell me it's proprietary, please.
Crude oil.
Crude oil. The stuff from Alberta?
Yes.
Bitumen, right? Are you running the bitumen through there?
It's the Canadian oil from the Canadian oil
Dilbit,
sands.
basically. Is that what you call it, dilbit? Isn't that what it's called, dilbit?
Well, they were it was either the site investigation work plan or the interim actions plan. There was some information in there on the crude types that were that we run.
So you're running different types of crude,
Yeah,
you know,
there's
you run
multiple-
different batches
there's
of
multiple
different
commodity pools,
types
yep.
of crude.
Because
Okay.
we have multiple customers that ship on our line.
Right. Is it the kind of the same stuff that you have on line 61? I'm just kind of wondering. Same batching kind of, you're either
we-
using 61 or you're using 6? Is that kind of how it goes?
We have multiple carriers that ship on all of our lines. And whether that goes down line 6 or 61 depends on who the customer is, where they want to get that product to, and what that product is.
But it's all pretty much similar in that it's coming up from that Fort McMurray, that Alberta, that
That's
Carter
one
Center.
location, yes.
Okay. But you don't run that in the northbound 13?
No.
Is there anything that you run in line 13 that might have been running in line 6 or that runs in line 61?
So the line 13 is diluent or condensate. That product is added to the crude oil to make it less viscous.
To
And
the bitumen?
If I could finish.
Okay, I just want to
Yeah,
have the
yeah.
same term so everybody in the room understands what we're talking about.
So that product is added to the crude to make it less viscous, make it easier to pump. That comes off as the first part of the refining process and is shipped north. So basically
In
that
13,
product,
yeah.
that on line 13, so that product is reused basically.
Okay. So then my question is, since it was dilbit, it would have contained diluent going down. And would I be correct in saying 30% of the contents of that pipeline is diluent?
I don't have that number, but I don't believe that's
Yeah, I would say
It's
not. So
nearly that
in
high.
in the report that identified the commodity pools, there was also, I think, a link in there to crudemonitor.ca, which is a website you can go to and look at all the details, whatever level you want on the crude type.
Okay.
And so if you went and reviewed those crude types that flow on that line, that would tell you if there was condensate in that product.
Okay. But if it was dilbit, I've read there's probably about 30% of it is diluent. You need to dilute the bitumen or you've got peanut butter in there.
Depends on the crude type. Some crude types don't have any at all.
Well, right, but in general, it's coming out of Fort McMurray area, if you're
It-
digging that up.
It depends on what crude it is. It
What-
really is. It varies from like a light motor oil to a darker crude black oil substance. So
What percentage of time are you running light crude in line 6 or line 61?
100% of the time.
Light
oil.
crude.
Oh, I don't know about the light crude.
It
It varies. Yeah.
It varies.
You-
It's
you-
based on what our marketers are shipping.
Okay.
We ship what our marketers have. Obviously, it goes through a lot of quality checks, a lot of quality standards before it ever gets on our line. But we are here to ship their product from point A to point B.
But you don't want to, you have no clue what percentage of time you are shipping
We have-
Alberta
we do.
oil
We-
sands, which
That's,
is diluted.
that's not a correct statement. We entirely know exactly what product we are shipping. We have MSDSs for every batch that is shipped, and we know exactly where those batches are because they are monitored as they are going down the pipeline. So if it is if there would be a release that would be all of a sudden release, we would know exactly what product that was.
Yeah, you'd have to.
In this case of the Cambridge release, it was over a period of time. And you and I both know that those batches aren't over years. We're talking over maybe a day or part of a day of the shipment of our pipeline. It's not that we're running the same batch for 2025.
Right, I do know you batch.
Yeah.
I also know that for the most part, it's dilbit coming through. Let's not belabor that. I would like to know how much of that is gas that evaporates. And the reason I'm going around with this is partly spill volume is hard to calculate when you've got a percentage of it evaporating, am I correct?
Well, that's with any release. You have a portion of it that evaporates.
Yeah, what portion do you think would have evaporated?
If it's in the open, like on the surface or on a surface water, you're probably looking at, what, 20% in the first 24 hours? Yeah.
But it wasn't surface,
Right, this is subsurface, so
Right.
there'd be less evaporation.
so there'd be less. So where does all that go then? Into the soil?
Yep, yeah.
We-
That's it.
There
It's
were
still
no
in the
soil
ground. Yeah,
gas
it
reading.
hasn't- it
It's
hasn't been
just
ex-
interesting, there were no soil gas readings, so we don't
Well,
really know.
and that's that's where the soil vapor extraction system comes in, because there are those, that product is volatile still, and so by pulling a vacuum on the soil, it allows that product to volatilize and be pulled to the surface and treated.
I'm glad you brought that up, because here we are 5 years later, and you are still doing an SVE in Fort Atkinson for a spill that could be up to 7,900 gallons, which would probably be about close to the amount of diluent you might have lost here. Now, granted, I'll grant you this, it's over time. But nevertheless, it's I don't know how long that's going to sit in the soil if somebody isn't getting it out. But this is my point. It's very hard to calculate a spill volume. I get that.
Yeah, it is.
But I think you have to also be honest about how much diluent went into the groundwater and into the soil here. And if it's the same amount or darn close at what they're dealing with on Black Hawk Road, you guys are going to be at this for a while. We're at 5 years, and it's going to take some money to clean that up. That's my only comment. If you want to go on, if that's fine. I don't want to sit up here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, I would like to thank Enbridge and the DNR for coming today and speaking about their subsurface investigation. I will continue to reach out regularly with the DNR. We do speak often. We will be putting on the website any updates that we have about the investigation. They will also be putting all the reports on the DNR's website. I will have links to that with the updates. I hope all of you will go onto the website, sign up for a notification, so every time we update the website with meetings or updates such as Enbridge, you will be notified of that, so you can take a look at it right away. I will continue to have Enbridge updates at our monthly meetings with anything that is pertinent, so we will be watching out closely and to ensure that our community, our people, our groundwater, and our lakes stay safe. If there's any indication that something has happened, we will be reaching out to everybody, and you can feel free to come to our meetings or reach out with any questions or comments you have at any time. So again, I want to thank all of you for coming. I appreciate it very much, and we'll keep everyone updated. So thank you very much for coming, and hope you have a good evening.